Hello, and welcome to another edition of U.S.-Japan Council's Japanese Americans and Japan Legacies video series. I'm Deborah Nakatomi. Diane Fukami and I are your hosts for this series of dialogues highlighting the lives and journeys of prominent Japanese American leaders, each of them pioneers in developing the U.S.-Japan relationship. Through their stories, we will learn about the role of Japanese Americans in strengthening U.S.-Japan relations and ways their experiences with Japan have contributed to their Japanese American identity and our community. We'd like to thank the U.S.-Japan Council for providing this opportunity to share their unique and powerful stories. We would also like to thank our friends at Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their invaluable support of this program and of Japanese American leaders to nurture the U.S.-Japan relationship. Today, Diane and I are happy to welcome Phyllis Campbell, Chair of JP Morgan Chase Pacific Northwest and Chair of the Board of U.S.-Japan Council. Welcome, Phyllis.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah. I appreciate it.
We're very excited to share your story today. We understand you were born and raised in Spokane, Washington, the oldest of 4 siblings, and your dad had a dry cleaning business. So to get us started, tell us a little bit about those early days growing up in Spokane in the Northwest.
Well, sure. Well, thanks again, and thanks to the U.S.-Japan Council for sponsoring this. And as I think about the early days, our family, like many Japanese American families in the Pacific Northwest, got to Spokane as a result of internment. So my father, who enrolled in the 442nd after high school, even though his brothers and sisters were interned in Minidoka, Idaho, and his father was interned at a military base in North Dakota, he still said he wanted to be part of the U.S. Army. So after getting out of the Army, he and the family relocated back to Spokane, where he went to high school, but he couldn't find a job. And finally, a dry cleaning establishment said they would give him a job and teach him the business, which was a great break for him. So he took the job and worked very, very hard. Eventually, he and another Japanese American man opened their own dry cleaners in Spokane. So, I always say it was my first exposure to business. We got to do everything in the business, wait on customers and balance the books and clean toilets and all the stuff you do when you're a small business owner. But me and all of my siblings had an opportunity to help work in the business. And really, again, it was just a great growing up experience in Spokane.
So it was a bit of a hard scrabble life. Wasn't it? Your mom did not work in the business, right? And so she had a job outside. So it was basically your father and your siblings all working really hard to make this thing happen, huh?
Right. And I was the oldest of 5 kids. So my mother, who was college educated from Hawaii, she did become a medical technologist. So she actually worked swing shift. My father worked during the day, she worked at night. And then many of the days and including weekends, I'd end up with kind of the co-parenting responsibilities, I guess you'd say, being the oldest of eventually 5 kids. So yeah, it was a bit of a hard scrabble life. We had no money, and obviously my father, they came after the internment and after the Army with no really net worth, nothing. We were able to eventually buy a house. But yeah, it was kind of a hard scrabble life. And yet I just remember some of my fondest memories, though, are my mother, who was such a generous person with her, I think, Hawaiian aloha spirit. She would always share everything we had. We'd find people at the dinner table that we didn't know, and people who were down and out that she'd give handouts to or write a check to or give cash to, and then they'd show up at our family dinner table. So, actually, it was one of those great communities to grow up in, because the community really pulled together to help everybody else out, because there were a lot of hard scrabble stories, obviously, besides ours.
We've read a little bit about some of your early life and your influences, and there have been a lot of references to your grandfather, and you have a lot of really vivid, fond memories of him growing up.
Yes, well, so we would go to Seattle a lot, because that's where my aunts and uncles eventually went back to Seattle, where they were before they were interned, and they raised their families in Seattle. So we go visit our cousins a lot. And my fondest memory was going to my Aunt Haneko's house, and I would see my grandfather, who then obviously was, well up in his years, but he would sit on the couch and he looked like he was asleep, he'd be sitting, upright, looking like he was asleep for maybe 2 hours. And so I thought he was always taking a nap. Well, later I found out that he would spend 2 or 3 hours a day meditating. I mean, he'd just be in deep meditation. And a little bit about him was he came from Japan. He was a kendo master, a Zen master, very educated. And how he got to Seattle was he was going to Cambridge University by boat from Japan to get his advanced degree in English literature, which was his specialty. But he got robbed of all his money on the boat, which was such an unfortunate story. So he ended up on the docks of Seattle with nothing. And he was taken in by some Catholic fathers who helped the family get relocated in the Seattle Bellevue area. So yeah, I kind of a full circle story about him was later I found out a lot about him because the Seattle at that time a newspaper wrote about him being, and they said a learned Takizaki was the headlines, has many lessons to teach, something like that. And so I would that article was something I kept as a teenager, and I'd read and reread, and so many lessons that he had to share really I think resonated with me. And I didn't talk with him much because he was a very, very quiet man. As I said, he meditated all the time, and then he passed away, unfortunately. But later I learned he was a friend to many Seattle artists. He was a mentor to artists like Paul Horiyuchi, Mark Tobey, and many of the great Northwest artists credit him for a lot of their philosophy and their art style.
You said you learned a lot of lessons from him. What kind of lessons, Phyllis?
Well, the one lesson that came through in this article, and again, I read this in the article, was about being a good person and giving back. And this quick story was in this article where they interviewed him. He said when he lived in Spokane, because he too first came to Spokane right after internment, he said he had a friend in Spokane who played the flute, and he just came to my grandfather and said, I'm not getting better. I keep playing and practicing. So what's your advice? And in the article, my grandfather told him that a good artist cannot be a great artist until he or she does two things. One is be a good person and do good things for others. So the lesson that he gave this man was lay down your flute and just forget about playing the flute. Go out and do good works for other people. Just take your time and go out and find things you can do for somebody else. And many months later, this man came back to him and said, that in fact did help make him a better artist. And so it was such a simple lesson, but I think the whole point of that very simple story is, get outside of yourself. Life's not about you. Life's about what you give back, and that it eventually comes back to you. But, I thought that was just a wonderful, simple sort of Zen way, I think, to illustrate a lesson that, I was very privileged to learn at a young age.
All right, so you're home, you're helping out, you're learning managerial skills with your siblings, and then you go away to college. Tell us a little bit about getting into college and your college experience.
Sure. Well, so yeah, we didn't have any money, and my father, like probably almost all Japanese American Nisei parents, said, if anything, we want all of you, to get a college education. Especially my father said, I didn't have choices. I mean, I was a dry cleaner. I became one of the best dry cleaners around, but I didn't have a choice. And I want you to at least have a choice. So if you want to be a dry cleaner, great. But if you don't, then you have choices to do other things. By the time we got to college, even though we'd worked in the family business and we'd had summer jobs, I still didn't have enough money. So it's another story about generosity, really. One day, and literally, one day when we were deciding, do we have enough money to go to the state university, a check came in the mail, and it was a check from a benefactor at Washington State University, where I got my undergraduate degree. And she had long been deceased, but the endowment was set up for, kids who are in need. And it was a very generous check. Honestly, I get emotional thinking about it, because I think, but for the generosity of somebody that probably didn't even know who she was benefiting many, many decades later after her death. I actually was able to go to college and got work study. But the thing I would tell you though is, it wasn't easy either, because being a minority in a mostly white, Caucasian community, and my dad wanted me to go into a sorority, and boy, that I was probably one of the few minorities, people of color in the sorority system. So it was really hard, and I found solace through studying, honestly, and through working on my business degree and really buckling down and studying, and I had fun. Don't get me wrong, I had at least a year of misspent youth there, so I'm not trying to plead that I was just totally heads down all the time. I did have my fun, but it was hard, and so but again, my dad said, get your degree and do well, and so I did end up getting my business degree, and that was an achievement for being the first in our family, although my mother obviously was a med tech, but the first of the siblings to get a college degree. And then the hard part came interviewing for jobs after that, but at least I got my college degree, and it was a great experience, and got through with work study and scholarships and loans that I had to pay back, but that's okay. It worked.
Okay, tell us about that hard part, getting your first job or getting a job.
Well, nobody wanted to hire a woman, and I don't think a woman of color, especially. I mean, I just was a total anomaly way back then. That was a few decades ago. Let's say when I came out of Washington State University, I was probably only 1 out of 10 who were female, first of all, in the business school at the time. And people just, they tell me all the stories about, we tried to hire a woman, she got pregnant and quit, da, 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 da. I heard every story in the book as to why I wouldn't be a good bet in the different jobs that I applied for. But I applied for everything. I wasn't necessarily set on a bank. I applied for retailers, and I was going to be married that summer to my husband, who was in Spokane, civil engineer. So, I wasn't really mobile, and that didn't help either. So finally, I decided I'm going to go to work for this old national bank in Spokane, because I banked there. I knew them. I liked them. I thought I'd be a great employee of this bank, because finance was my love and my specialty. So they told me no. They said, women don't work for other women. We haven't had good luck. All the stories that they probably, couldn't have said today, but said, many, many moons ago. And they, and rather than get discouraged, it actually made me go the other way. I thought, I'm just going to show them that I am the right person. And I literally called them every day for, I don't know, 3 months. They'd say, oh, you again. I'd say, you really need to hire me. I am going to be a good bet for your management training program. And, if you take a chance on me, I'll show you, and just hire me. And pretty soon, I just think they got tired of me. They didn't hire me because they thought I really would be great. They just said, oh God, all right, we're going to hire you, even though we have all these, trepidations. But I think, again, they were just tired. So that's a story about persistence pays, I guess. And obviously it worked out.
What did you learn at the first place of employment?
I think it goes back to my father's dry cleaning business. I think always just never be too proud to do anything. I was in the management training program, and I had to learn to be a teller. I had to learn every job in the bank from the bottom up. And one teller told me, which was, I think, really another great lesson, was, we get these really, sort of whippersnappers in who come here with their college degrees. They think they're so much better. And they just want to do the job just to check a box, and they move on. You're different. You sort of ask how you can help us, and and sit in the break rooms with us, and you're willing to take out the trash and make the coffee in the morning. And I said, isn't that just what you do? If the phone rings, you answer it. If the trash needs taken out, you take it out. And it's kind of what we did in our small business. And I think that really helped me through my whole career, because I just realized, look, it's a team. We're all in this together, and my job is no more important. We each have a different job in the organization, and we all need to kind of help each other out. And I always say, even when I became a manager eventually of the branch, I always say, we work with each other. Nobody works for me, and I've never seen it that way in life. So I think that was a really good lesson, and I just learned that people really will work with you if you have that attitude, but also if you, take time to build the relationships and right, get to know people, what makes them tick, what worries them, what can you help with, and just remembering their kids' names, things like that. So I mean, it all was things that I thought were kind of simple, but there are lessons I think that served me well through my career.
Your hard work and your persistence really paid off early in your career. You learned early on the value of hard work, and it was recognized. And I can recall you mentioning some mentors and some people in your life who have really played key important roles at different points in your life. Tell us about some of your mentors.
Sure. Well, yeah, thanks, Mike. The important message here, Deborah, is that mentors really do matter. Mentors and sponsors do matter. Now, mentors you can cultivate yourself, because I've found throughout my life that asking people for advice and reaching out to others when you're in a tough spot, I mean, that's to me a mentor, but to me, you've got to seek those out yourself. Sponsors are a little different. I've been lucky to have sponsors, but usually they found me, and you don't go out and necessarily say, I am going to go out and look for a sponsor, because they usually are observing you and you don't know it. So I've had, luckily, both people who have been both a mentor and a sponsor. And the first one was a guy named Dave Clack, who's still alive, by the way. I just talked to him this week. He's just so robust. He just turned 90. He said he's in his 80th year of skiing. He said, I'm going to be up in the slopes this winter. I'm going to be skiing. I'm thinking, wow, that is so inspirational. But that's the kind of person he was and is. He just is somebody that doesn't see barriers, doesn't see your color or your gender. He just sees some person who really wants to achieve and do well. And he saw that in me at a very young age. And he would always have a philosophy, though, that again, it's not about you, which is this is sort of the theme of my grandfather too, because he actually quoted his grandfather, who told him, and this is an expression that stuck with me, the more you give, the more you get back. It's an unending circle. And he said, you don't do things because you get stuff back, but you do things because it is part of the circle of life. And it eventually comes back to you in ways that you don't see it, you don't know, you don't even know. But as a business and a business person, that we really have to pay attention to the community and what we derive from the community, and that our businesses in our communities. And so to give back and spend time volunteering, encouraged us to get politically active. I mean, all those things that I would have just never thought of, because I never saw that as a connection to business. But he said, no, in fact, that is a key part of business. If you're going to be successful, you better be giving back and really paying attention to how healthy is your community and your customers and your employees, because it's really the unending circle, right? So that was something I know gets talked about a lot today, but didn't get talked a lot about back then. But he's definitely been the embodiment of that. So that's one mentor in my early career. My later career was a mentor and a sponsor also. So the bank eventually got sold to another bank, and Dave introduced me to the person who became my next mentor and sponsor, a guy named Gary Cameron. And again, I didn't know Gary, he didn't know me, but Dave said, this is a rising star. She's now the manager of a number of our branches in Eastern Washington. And, I'd really appreciate it if you'd kind of look out for her and her career. And he did. And I don't know why, we just clicked. Gary and I clicked too. And, we ended up having some hobbies in common. We were both from Eastern Washington, liked to golf. We just talk about issues in general, but we found a nice friendship, I would say, as well as kind of a boss subordinate relationship. And he eventually became a sponsor. So he would always tell me to get ready. And his expression was always get ready. I'd say, get ready for what? I'd say, just get ready. He'd say, you never know in your life what door opens, what door closes. He shared with me the fact he grew up as a foster kid. He was kicked from one home to another. And he said, doors would close all the time, but I would always be ready for the next door that would open. And sure enough, another door would open, another door would open. He said, you just have to be ready for those opportunities emotionally and education and all of that, but be ready. And, and I thought that was interesting, but I wasn't really sure what that meant. So one day he called me, and I was managing all the branches in Eastern Washington, and he called me and said, I'm coming from Seattle. He's the president of the bank now, and flew to Spokane, took me to lunch. I said, well, so what's up, Gary? And he said, I want you to take this big job. You have to move to Seattle, by the way. And, you're going to be managing all of the branches for the whole bank. And I said, well, how long do I have to think about it? He looks at his watch and said, about an hour. And I thought, an hour? And he said, remember I told you get ready? I said, oh my God, but my husband's got a job here. And I just always thought I'd stay in Spokane. I never saw myself ever moving. He said, Phyllis, remember about the taking risks, getting ready. I said, wow, I mean, I can't even imagine moving and all of that. But, I ended up doing it, and my husband followed me, which was, it's amazing of him. And, it ended up being obviously the trajectory that took me to the next level, but he really pushed me at that point. And the next thing that happened was the same thing, get ready. He called me about 2 years after this promotion and said, up to his office again and said, what do you want to do next? I said, I just got this big promotion. I never thought I'd ever be the head of all the branches. And he said, what do you want to do next? And I couldn't think of anything. So I said, well, I don't know. You're the president of the bank. How about your job? Because I just thought, I didn't even know what I would want to do. And then I said, 5 years from now. He just smiled and said, okay, fine. Well, 2 weeks later, he called and said, you're going to be the next president of the bank. I said, I just don't think I can do that. I'm sorry. I just don't think I can do that. He said, you're ready. In fact, you're more ready than most of the guys who have been hanging around my doorstep thinking they're ready. So, those are two, I think, people that I, think about when I think about mentors, sponsors, people that give you these lessons in life. And they do it because, they're paying it forward, probably from somebody else who helped them.
So
go ahead.
Sorry, one of the takeaways that I have from that is that you listened and you really put into practice some of the great advice that you got over the years, and you had a really wonderful career in banking, and then you were pivoting to a career shift, which sounds like it might not have been really anticipated. So when that pivot and that career shift happened, and the opportunity with the Seattle Community Foundation, how did that happen for you?
Well, that was another just total unexpected door to open. And at that point, after having a successful career as president of the bank, I decided, the bank had been bought again, by the way. So I just thought, I've really done everything I set out to do now. I've had one of the highest positions as president of one of the largest banks in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know what else I can do. Probably as I advise other people that I mentor, when you feel like you've kind of topped out, or you feel like you're not pushing any new boundaries or learning new things, you need to go do something else. And I thought, I'm kind of there. I need to take my own advice, darn it. So I actually announced that I would step down and take a sabbatical. And I did that, on my own volition. It wasn't somebody asking me to leave like banking. I just thought, just need to take some time and, go out and try to improve my golf game and clean my closets and do a few things that I hadn't had time to do in my life. So I just stepped down, and I thought, well, I'll just step down for 90 days, maybe go back to work and find a small business to run that's unrelated to banking, something different. I just wanted to do something different, but I wasn't sure. Well, 3 months turned into 6 months, turned into 9 months, turned into a year, and I still hadn't found anything. Thought, oh God, maybe I'm unemployable now, because I was only getting calls for banking jobs, and I didn't want to go back and do that. So in any event, I got really immersed myself in nonprofit boards, including the Seattle Foundation. So I became the chair of the board of the Seattle Foundation, which is the largest community foundation here in the Pacific Northwest. And I loved it because it was about growing philanthropy and charity, and, helping donors giving donors advice on how to give their money away in an effective manner, and just working with a great small team, 20 people. And it was just fantastic. I loved it. It was something that was my kind of give back time, I think. So But in any event, I wasn't running it. And the woman who was running it, who had run it for a number of years, decided she'd step down because it was time for her to retire. And so I said, well, I'll lead the search and we'll find somebody. And we launched a national search, and the board, I wasn't on the search committee, but the board, a couple of board members came to me and said, well, why don't you apply for this? I said, oh, I'm not, nonprofits, that's not me. I'm a business person. Maybe when I'm in my, rocking chair, my golden age, I'll do a nonprofit, but no, not now. That's not me. And they said, well, why not? It's the business of philanthropy. And the board really is looking for somebody that can, put in a tech platform, do all the things that need to be done in a great nonprofit. And who better than you to do it? And I had to think long and hard about it. But again, I called my mentors together and they said, we think you should apply. But I got to tell you, applying for a job at that age and stage of career was not something that I was very excited about, probably because I was worried if I didn't get the job and I interviewed, then I'd have to, I'd have to step off the board, obviously. But, I knew all these board members and, they had to pick the best person. But then I thought, oh, you know what? It's just my ego. I need to put my ego aside. If this is something I believe in and want to do, and I can convince myself I want to do it, then I should just do it. So I did step off the board. I went into the search. I interviewed alongside, 5 other finalists, and lo and behold, got the job. But then I felt like the dog that was chasing the car, and now I got the car and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought, oh my God, I've never run a nonprofit. How am I going to do this? So luckily, again, I called my mentors together, and including the former CEO of the Seattle Foundation, who became a mentor. And, everybody really, including great board, really helped me through it. But it was pretty rough the first year and a half because, there were a lot of issues we had to deal with. So anyway, learned a lot though, really enjoyed it and loved it, and did that for 6+ years till another pivot came. So yeah, I don't know. Sometimes those are the Gary Cameron, get ready, a door is going to open that you least expect. And that was a very unexpected door.
But Phyllis, a lot of what you talk about is risk taking, or actually taking that leap of faith, not sure if you'll be able to do the job or you have the capability of doing the job, and actually going for it. How does that happen? And what advice can you give for people who like to play it a little more cautiously and are scared of taking those risks?
Sure. Well, no, it's a really good question, because I do mentor a lot of women and certainly people of color. And I think especially, and I say we as women, I think that is part of, and particularly I think as a Japanese American, I was raised with a, get your education, excel by achieving, get the best grades, do this, do that. And that I think was just the old don't bring shame on the family. And of course, the don't bring shame on the family can also be heard in your head in a funny way, which is, don't step out on the ledge, because if you fall over or you fall flat on your face, that in itself could be shameful. Well, I think that was probably my misinterpretation. And sometimes as women, I think we get the feeling that we have to be like 100% prepared in order to take a risk and say yes and do something. And the fact is, you don't. And, I think the most valuable lessons I've learned, honestly, are the ones where I took the get ready seriously and be ready. And, and you have to say to yourself, you're as ready as anybody. And you know what? Taking a big position or taking a risk means you're going to stumble, and it means you're going to make mistakes. And it means that, yeah, there may be a failure or two there, but it's okay, because you know what? Those are good teachers. And that's, I think, where successful people that I've watched through my life have excelled, is people who've taken a risk. And yeah, no, they haven't been perfect. They've stumbled. And I stumbled a lot when I took the president job, because I didn't know what I was doing. I stumbled when I took the Seattle Foundation job. You stumble into these things and you go in, you think with eyes wide open, but you can't, just by definition, because in order to grow, right, you have to take risks. So my advice to people is, just take the risk. You're much more ready than you think you are. And my mentors always told me that, thank God. So I try to pass that advice on to others and say, you'll never be 100% ready. And if you are, it's probably not the right job, by the way, because you won't grow. So that's really, I think, the lesson I've learned is, nothing's perfect, but hey, mistakes and stumbling and, sometimes failure are great teachers.
Well, listening to you and some of the other people that we've talked to, I better understand the power of networking. Especially being Japanese American, that's not always an easy thing to do, or we haven't been trained that way. So many of us were taught to believe you work really hard and you're going to get rewarded. But you seem to have used networking really well. Can you give us some tips about networking and how to do it well and successfully?
Well, I don't know if I have the tips on how to necessarily do it well. It's just the way, I've done it. But I think, again, another mentor gave me some advice relatively early in my career to say, again, hard work, you've got to be able to excel in your job. That's probably 60 to 70% of your success. And if you don't do that, then, you're not going anywhere. And that's a given. But so naturally the question is, so what's the other, what's the other 2/3 or 2/3 of it? And said, the other is networking and building relationships. And, he said, you're very driven. And sometimes you think that's the last thing you have time to do is to spend 2 hours on the golf course or to, you know, um, go out for, refreshment after work or to just spend time going to coffee with people. But you know what? That is the other part of success. And your relationship building and your network is going to serve you in many ways that you won't even see and know. And so just take time and do it and build it and make it a daily and weekly practice. And it was such good advice because I'm one of those, I'm such a, goal oriented. Okay, I got this thing to do. I need to do it. And oh, by the way, somebody wants to take an hour out and go to coffee, really? But I realized that is part of my job, and that always has been part of my job. So whenever I'm new to a community or new to an organization, it's the first thing I do. When I went to the Seattle Foundation, I took every board member, 27 of them, out to lunch or dinner and really just sat with them and asked them questions. Every staff member. I mean, all part of it was it's not about for a goal. It's to build the relationship and understand what makes people tick and to be of service. So what I always tell other people is don't build your network because it's about you. Build your network because you want to build a relationship, but it's reciprocal. How can I help you? I always end by how can I help you? So one quick anecdote, if I could tell it, is about the Bill Gates senior story. If I could, just tell that story because it was part of building my network that I, again, took a risk and I didn't think, it would ever pan out for me. When I left the bank during my sabbatical, I was kind of adrift for a while, especially after 12 months, not knowing what I wanted to be when I really grew up. And people said to me, well, why don't you call 3 or 4 important people in Seattle and just take them to lunch and build a relationship and ask them for help. And somebody said, why don't you call Bill Gates Sr., Bill, obviously the founder of Microsoft's father, who was a very important person in his own right. I said, Bill Gates Sr., and oh, just call him, just take him to coffee. So I called him and I said, Bill, I know we've met a couple of times. You don't really know me, but it's Phyllis Campbell. I'm in between jobs right now, and you pretty much know everybody in town. And would you have time for me to come out to your office, maybe 15 minutes just to spend and have me ask you a few questions? He said, 15 minutes, Phyllis, let's go to lunch. I'm taking you to lunch, my treat. I about dropped the phone. But I mean, the point is he just exhibited that such gracious, right, behavior on the other end of, to him, building a relationship was important. He asked me a lot of questions during lunch. And at the end of lunch, he said, there's probably a couple people that I can introduce you to that you should meet. And he followed through. So, I just think to do that, and sometimes it's kind of scary because you think, well, maybe they'll tell me no, maybe they will. But in some cases like this one, a very important person like Bill Sr., who unfortunately passed, he was just so gracious and absolutely did help. And I think most people are like that, but you have to take the risk again to, to reach out.
So I want to shift a little bit. Many of the people tuning in today to see your interview are connected to U.S.-Japan Council, and wondering if you can give a little bit of background in your involvement with the Japanese American community, certainly in the Northwest, and also how you became acquainted and got involved in USJC.
Well, sure. I mean, I give USJC all the credit for connections, to my roots, really. I grew up, as I said, in mostly a Caucasian community because that many Japanese American families after the war had gone back to the West Coast where they were from, whereas our family stayed back in Spokane. So there weren't very many other Asian Americans, Japanese Americans, many people of color in Spokane. So I grew up in mostly a Caucasian community. And my parents, like many Niseis, did not want us to learn the language, did not give us Japanese names. We just were not, and they didn't talk about their culture, much beyond my mom's Hawaii roots, but I really didn't know much about my Japanese American roots. So, that was pretty much lasted through most of my early to mid career. And then one, year, I guess, so that would have been 2011. I got a call from some of my Japanese American friends in Seattle. Now I'd moved to Seattle, who said, we nominated you for this program called the Japanese American Leadership Delegation, JAL. I said, what's that? And so several of them who'd been told me about it. And they said, Phyllis, you just have to do it. And I said, I go to Japan all the time for business. I don't need to go there. I've been there, and, I've traveled a lot. So, I don't see the need to do this, but, thanks for nominating me. And they said, no, you just need to do it. And then Irene Hirano Noe called me and said, you really need to do this. You've been nominated by the Consul General in Seattle, and, we've already decided you're the one. So, you don't have a choice. And of course, when Irene would tell you something, you just do it. So I said, okay, and I looked at my calendar. I thought, oh my God, I've got to cancel all these meetings. And okay, this better be worth it. But I was really skeptical. So it ended up obviously being the thing that connected me. And I can't even explain to you why. It was obviously a great program with great content, great connections. Spending that, 7-8 days in Japan was amazing. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, that was the earthquake year, which was an unfortunate end to it. But the point is that, I think that was the first time that I just suddenly clicked with me. This is my heritage. These are my roots. And, I saw Japan and the relationship through a very different set of lens. And then, of course, seeing the tragedy after the earthquake and tsunami really gave me a deep appreciation for, the people of Japan and the culture, and realizing that was part of who I am. And, shame on me that it took me that long to kind of click with that. But after that, then of course, Irene, got me very involved, and I was happy to do it because I felt such a great debt of gratitude to US Japan Council for this JALD experience. And, and so since then, I think I've had such a great appreciation for the people-to-people and business-to-business relationships that US Japan Council has really, I think, nurtured, but also in my case, really probably ignited, which was an unexpected, part of the JAL trip.
Well, that JAL trip leads to you becoming a leader at USJC, with your role as president and everything. Can you tell us a little bit about the influence that Irene had on you?
Yeah, boy, I tell you, it's emotional. So, I still miss her greatly. And I guess what I saw more than anything in her was a person who had the absolute contributor's mindset. I don't think I've ever seen anyone who has both an entrepreneurial and a contributor's mindset that could put things together. And the genius of the Japanese American National Museum could found USJC to see the need to build those relationships and to do it in such a gracious and welcoming way. So I think she's just been a role model for all of us. As I think back on her greatest legacy, it's not so much building these amazing organizations, which is a legacy in itself, but it's the way she always had, the way of making you feel like you're welcome, you're important. And, she modeled that people-to-people relationship. So, it was an opportunity when she asked me to take on the chairmanship of the board of USJC that I thought, it's a way to pay back a little bit of her legacy and I guess really in a way to thank her for everything. So of course, I said yes. And I told her I'd only do it for 2 years, but Irene, so I did it for 3 years, but unfortunately, had to see it through the time of her, declining health and through her eventual passing, which was extremely hard for all of us. But, when I think about it, there's a lot of joy there because I think all of us are there serving because, we were there to carry on her amazing legacy and that graciousness that she showed everybody and the kindness and really, I think the passion for building these networks that, continue today.
So much of your life and your job and your career goes back to core values. That seems like such an important part of who you are, and you feel you have such a foundation there. Talk a little bit about your core values.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that as a lesson, maybe that I think it's really important to always anchor in your own core values. And we each have maybe a different set of words that we'd use. And, mine might be things like kindness, integrity, just making sure that you're leaving more than you take out of any situation. So it's a little bit of that. Probably a lot of what we talked about with Irene is that those sort of deep principles that drive everything you do. But I think that those are the important things that I reflect on a lot because whenever I get into a tough decision or when I get into a tough situation, or maybe I'm the only one in the room that feels a certain way about a certain issue, I say, okay, am I reading this on my core values? And is this, being driven from something I feel strongly about? And when it is, then I go forward. And sometimes I'm the only voice in the room that's, maybe speaking a contrary opinion to something. But if it's a core value, I think it's really important. And because of our diversity being, women, especially maybe Asian American, Japanese American, you sometimes see things differently because of your life experiences. So I think core values define who we are, but they also sort of serve as, to me, the filters through which we can put different decisions against and through which we can, really, I guess, check our own ego sometimes at the door. Because sometimes, I speak for myself, my ego sort of gets out in front and I say, okay, wait a minute. Am I doing this because it's really rooted in a core value, or am I doing it because I feel like this is going to, make me look good, or, whatever motivation might be in front of us because we're human beings. So yes, I can't say that my core values are better, because we're all slightly different. But I do think the important message here is, just be really clear about what are your core values, and then anchor, them and use them as filters for decisions that you make in your life.
I've heard you talk a number of times about leadership, especially leadership for women. You've broken a lot of glass ceilings in your career, continue to do so, obviously. So when you reflect back on your younger self and where you are today, I'm really kind of curious, what are those lessons that you've carried forward where you are today and how have you changed? How have you evolved over time? Because you were just this hardworking, very, very pushy woman early on in your career. You knew you needed to push hard in order to make progress. And I see you now as somewhat of a you've arrived. You're a calmer, confident leader. I've heard you speak a lot to women leaders in a career setting and in a corporate setting, as well as in a community setting. So what are those lessons that you're imparting these days to women leaders?
Well, thanks for the question, Deborah. I mean, it was so long ago when you talk about my younger self, but I can't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday. But thinking about those early days, I mean, I think it's natural when you're in your 20s. You're worried about a lot of things. You're anxious about how you're going to appear in the corporate world, because most of my career's been in the corporate world. You're anxious about what the bosses think of you. You're anxious about impressing people. You're anxious about making your goals. My case, building my branch, beating my numbers, this, that, and the other thing. So those are all things that, again, that's part of doing your job. And I would be remiss if I said, don't do that, because, I still have goals today. And so we all have different goals in our career and life, and that's an important thing to focus on. But I think I was more focused on that than anything else, and almost to the exclusion of friends and sometimes family. And because I just thought that's what I had to do. And I think, as I hit into my 30s and 40s, again, this advice from mentors about relationships, about things that the contributor's mindset, the lessons of my grandfather kept coming back to me. Be a good person, do good things for other people, and the Dave Clack, the more you give, the more you get back. So those things started to then really start to take hold, that really that's what life is about, is how you show up, to be present, to give back, to make sure that you're focused on other people, not so much things or goals. And that I think was a turning point in many ways for me, is those lessons all of a sudden became real to me, and I understood why they were important. So I guess the biggest lesson today that I look back on, and it's not just because I'm old, because I am old, and when you're older, you can sort of look back with more wisdom about those things. But I think mid-career, I was lucky to kind of get those lessons in my head, and to really realize, look, yes, you do need to always figure out why you're there, what purpose do you serve, what's your life's calling, how are you going to make this community better, how do you make this business better, how do you make people's lives better, and that in and of itself, if you start there, then at least I find I've always ended up in the right place. So that to me is probably the most important thing that continues to serve me well even today in my later career.
We know you mentor a lot of women. What kind of advice would you give to Asian Americans and Japanese Americans, especially those who are trying to navigate old world values, but in a very 21st century, high tech sort of world?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I would say there's several things that I would impart today, especially, that I think are more important than ever. And one of it is to show up, be heard, and be seen. And a lot of times I go into meetings and I just see women and maybe people of color just hang back a little bit too much. And then it's my job to call on them and say, Bob, you haven't said anything today. You look like you're going to say something. But if you get in a situation and you have a bunch of loud people talking over each other, I think a tendency as a woman, a person of color, you should just sort of hang back and wait for your turn. Well, sometimes your turn never comes. So figure out a way to show up and be heard and be seen. And that's not always culturally, what do you want to say, natural. And so I've had to really make sure that, I'll watch and observe people in management meetings or settings, and I'll take them off to the side after and say, you didn't say anything the whole meeting. I could tell you disagree, but you have to put your voice in there. And there's a way to do it in an unemotional or non-emotional way, in a non-defensive way, but to show up, be heard, be seen. And I think, again, that's a little bit of having to overcome some of the ingrained messages that were maybe way back when. So that's one. The other one is to take those risks. And I think part of it is, a lot of people, even in my own company today, I see folks get stuck in staff jobs, get stuck in, what I would consider to be more safe places. And I'll take people aside and say, you need to raise your hand for that line job, that revenue raising job. And I know it's scary, and I know you have to put your numbers out there, but that's the one way you're going to be taken seriously. And again, the stumble, the fall, okay, but you're gonna learn a lot of stuff, but you got to take a risk in order to be seen and be heard, and to be really respected. And in some ways, I think that's one of the more important things I would say to young Asian American folks, is you really do have to get out there and show that you can roll your sleeves up, earn your stripes, and you know what, that does involve taking some risk, and it's okay. It will be okay. And that's the way you will get noticed, and you will get promoted. You will get asked onto corporate boards, but you have to take that kind of risk to really show up.
Those are really good lessons. So as we're beginning to wrap up, Phyllis, we're really curious to ask you what's next for you. What's still on you?
Jeez.
What's still on your list?
Well, that goes back to a little bit of the where am I needed? What's my calling? And I say that in that maybe that's a lesson for today is the world's changing and has changed so much in 2020 in ways that we never ever expected. And so I really mean that seriously. I think it's really important no matter what stage you are in life. And I would apply that to myself sitting here today. I have a great job. I work for a great employer. I sit on a number of boards. I'm very lucky to be engaged and to be an advisor to many, companies and people and mentor many people. So I really sit back and think about, what is my next calling? And I don't have to have the answer. And that's the good news about it, right? What is that next door that's supposed to open? And that's a different question than what door do I think I should open or what door do I think I need to go through? So, I think that's probably the parting advice I would have is, the world's changing so much and, because of COVID and because of so many things that we didn't expect. And there's a lot of need out there and different needs. And, the world has, I think the world has a need just to really be able to come back together and dialogue and solving problems. So there's probably another answer out there that will emerge, and I'll see what it is. I'm not done yet. I just feel like if there's a calling out there, that will become apparent, and it's a door that I probably know I'll need to walk through.
Is there anything in particular that kind of intrigues you, though?
I right now I don't know. I've loved and continue to love my involvement with U.S.-Japan Council as an example, and the reason is because it is about that people-to-people, those people-to-people relationships. It has a global aspect to it. It brings in dialogue, disparate voices together culturally, but it's an important mix that needs to happen. So things like that, I think those are the criteria maybe that I look for. And I just went on the Allen Institute board, which it was endowed by Paul Allen. That was formerly the Brain Institute. And they are doing a lot of research on cell science, biologic science to look for the next breakthrough in Alzheimer's and even now in COVID. So things like that are intriguing to me. And I would say that's probably the last thing I would say to your question, Diane, is where can I learn? Not just where can I contribute and where can I, get into an interesting area, but what can I learn? I'm very intrigued by, really interesting problems in society. And right now, I really feel like we're in the age of science and science breakthroughs and big breakthroughs that will help the world. So, that's the reason I said yes to the Allen Institute as a nonprofit, as my next nonprofit, because I'm really very intrigued by things like that. So I think, those are the big things that I really like to focus on. And then I say, well, what, value can I add? And if I can, then and what can I learn? And if I can do both, then, I think it's a fit.
Well, thank you very much. We look forward to hearing more about what's next, Phyllis.
Okay,
thank you so much for sharing your fascinating story with us today. And we want to also thank everyone for tuning in to hear Phyllis's incredible story. Your support today of the U.S.-Japan Council and programs like this allows the Council to continue to bring high quality programming. We hope you enjoyed the dialogue with Phyllis today. We hope you will check in with us on our other series and other items that are available on USJC's website. So thanks again, Phyllis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.